Yeah, I had to close it up there. Yeah, you have to take the screws out to open that face up. I'll tell you what happens wire. It's just where the door vibrates, and it vibrated the screws. Yeah, almost caught it.
Good morning, AI. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is your Sensei Alba. And how you doing?
How are you moving? Move. You moving?
I'm in a busy railroad station, waiting for my destination. Going from one night stand. I'm a one-man band. Ooh.
The deacons there. How do you have a man being at a church with the deacons?
It seems like about where the pan is coming through the railroad station here. And when we look, basically, dead. They are stuck. Everyone is stuck. The people who are most stuck are the ones that are self-medicated with alcohol, food, snacks. And it was interesting when I was a counselor. I worked for a large shop. And I primarily was working for a think tank that was looking at the correlation of why X, Y, and Z was happening within the social structure. After Praise Jesus.
You have a lovely day, sir.
Thank you.
This is the Great Gazoo talking to you up here in Control Central. It's all going along to plan. Utilitarian too. Dan dancing across your planet. Yes, it's, going along the planet, China and Italy and Iran and now in America. And in 65 other countries who everyone's getting scared. You're going to want to be putting camps, yes. Who benefits from all this? That's all you gotta know. Who benefits? The big kazoo, that's who. We're talking to you. We own you. You are just useless eaters. You are our fillet steaks. We love messing with you. This is the Grand Kazoo. Your stock markets, your money, it's worthless. Toilet paper is worth more. This is the Grand Kazoo talking to you. We own you. We control you.
You might be able to use this military gadget. Find out how. This is what happens when you breathe in 200%.
The beginning of the study of magnetism can be traced back to Egypt. Also, we find the Greeks used it, and among the Greeks and early Egyptians, we have the first understanding of the nature of magnetism. It was used principally in healing. It was well known to Pythagoras, who gave us considerable information on the subject, which was promptly forgotten by everybody else. Then we have little knowledge of it, except through the Arabs. The Chinese were aware of it because of the discovery of the mariner's compass. But for the most part, it was neglected until the 17th century, when it became involved in the story of Rosicrucianism. The alchemists, the Rosicrucians, and the Hermetists all were unfolding phases of magnetic theory. Then we come down a little later and we come upon a curious instrument, Mesmer's magnetic tub. This was a kind of tank in which many people put their feet at the same time, held hands, and created a battery out of the water in the tank. Incidentally, the magnetic theory is based upon a very simple fact, namely that what we call empty air is not empty at all. It is the most profoundly used all the elements that we know anything about. We all live within air and have our being, and we know that if air fails, we die. But what we do not realize is that air is not just some oxygen or helium or something of this nature. Air is something in itself. It is a substance of itself. It is a substance so real and so important that it's almost impossible to estimate it. It is a tremendous field of magnetic energy. The atmosphere carries the magnetism of the sun. The study of the magnetic powers of the sun will be more or less clearly understood by the study of the seasons. Winter, summer, spring, and these things have all to do with a magnetic factor in the air. And we think of it only as in trying to explain it as a physical astronomical phenomena, since as the rotation and revolutions of the sun and planets. But each of these planets is a field of magnetic energy. Energy through what we call air. One thing learned from television is that air transmits. We know, for instance, that we can have all kinds of programs on the air at the same time. And they can come from all directions. And they can overlap and interlap. but each one will remain separately identified as though it was moving in a channel or a circuit of its own.
In 1939, an international organization headed by John D. Rockefeller decided to put together a global tuning standard to a simple 440 hertz. Now, the challenge with that was that if we add up 4 plus 4 plus 0 doesn't equal 9. It must answer at 9. If not, it will not have a perfect geometric correspondence.
Hi, I'm Dave Bennett. I had a near-death experience back in 1983. That was the beginning of a really long spiritual journey. So back in 1983, I was the chief engineer of a research vessel. We did underwater exploration. It was my dream job. And one night, March 3rd of 1983, we were coming back from evaluating a new submarine. And we were trying to beat a storm because the harbor was rather shallow. And when we got within 2 miles, the harbor master refused us entry because there were 25 to 30 foot breakers hitting the outer breakwater. So they were concerned that we wouldn't be able to bring our ship in. We're a fairly large ship for this small marina. But because we had a crew on board and one of the design engineers for the submarine we were evaluating needed to get to LAX, the captain decided to put the small rubber boat, the Zodiac, into the water. We used that boat to retrieve submarines in heavy seas and stuff like that. So we weren't too concerned about it. And he asked me to come along because during this trial, we didn't have a full contingency of crew on board. So I was the third officer, I was the chief engineer, and I knew the harbor. And so he thought maybe I should go along to just help the deckhand that we had get these folks in and then come back out. And so the ship was stationed about 2 miles offshore, and it was in some, big rollers and heavy rollers, but we weren't too concerned about it. It was at nighttime, but we could see the shoreline was, kind of like a school of fish, actually, but they were all coordinated and of one mind. And I was just absolutely fascinated in watching these fragments of light and the movement of light and color and everything that they were displaying. And as I got closer, 3 fragments broke away. And all the time that I was moving toward this light, I kept feeling love more and more and more, stronger and stronger. Well, 3 fragments broke away. And as they came closer, I recognized them as family, but not any family that I'd lived in this life with, but just a recognition of that this was a family. And they communicated to me a thought, a meaning, a perception of welcome home. And I'll tell you, it was the most emotional homecoming I think I could have ever experienced. Because in my life, I grew up in a very dysfunctional type of family environment. I moved from one family to the next, to the next, to the next. I never really got a sense of being a part of a family. But here, these 3 beings at first greeted me, and eventually a dozen came, and they were my family. I like to think of them as a soul family. And they were welcoming me home. And they communicated to me that we were going to go deeper into the light. And as we did, we went into this area that I perceived as being spherical, round, like inside a ball. And we started to relive my life. And when I say we, I meant myself. I started to experience it as if I was reliving it, but not only from my perspective, but from everyone I'd ever interacted with. So it was like my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness. And I was reliving my life and re-experiencing it from all these different points of view. And not only was I experiencing it this way, but my soul family, these beings that greeted me home and welcomed me home, they were experiencing it the same way. And when I became aware of that, I was a little, I have to say, I brought with me some of my fears that these people didn't want to see some of the things that I had done, because I became a chief engineer in my early 20s. And, I was a brash young man. And my philosophy was to cut your, it really doesn't take anyone else into consideration. So they got to experience this reliving of my life. But they didn't judge me. In fact, if anything, they supported me. They loved me. And it felt almost as if they were excited to be in this process with me of reviewing my life, looking at my life. It was this incredible experience after experience that just kept evolving and growing and becoming bigger. And it was awe-inspiring and humbling all at the same time. To see how much we really affect one another was quite amazing. But I got to a point where I was not seeing things that I could relate to. I had gotten past the point of my drowning. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually perceiving parts of my future. The interesting thing was that in the part where I had lived my life, that was crystal clear. But when I passed that threshold into my future life, then it wasn't quite as clear. It was like I was looking down a corridor, and that corridor was clear. It was like out of focus, but I had this corridor of clarity, and it felt like I could go off to the right if I wanted and come back, or go off to the left a little bit if I wanted and come back. And I got the feeling that that was what we would consider as our free will. And so I kept going down this corridor and experiencing things that I really didn't have any reference to. In fact, if anything, it kind of disoriented me a little bit because of that lack of reference, until I got to this certain point where the unity of these lights, all of this light that was surrounding this bubble, spoke in unison, and it said, "This is not your time."
Hi everyone, Mark Barden here at Sandy Hook Promise. On December 14th, 2012, my 7-year-old son Daniel was shot to